You're listening to Porn-Free Masculinity, where you connect to your recovery and your destiny.
Well, hey guys, welcome back to The Mirror with Chris and Rob. We are here talking about story again today. And what we want to do is go a little bit deeper in something that we mentioned in our last conversation, which is when you're telling your story and sharing your story with other people, one of the things that comes back to you is a deeper understanding of the truth. You know, what was the truth of your story in your family of origin? What was the truth of the harms that you experienced? What was the truth of how your parents were harmed and their harm affected you and the environment that you grew up in? And many, many more topics. So, Rob, when I talk about this idea of getting to the truth, especially when I'm working with guys or doing story groups or even doing my own story, one of the things I'm trying to do is get to the emotional truth. I'm trying to get clear about how the story feels. And the reason that I think that's so important is because so much of my story actually doesn't live in my brain. So much of my story is actually in my body.
Yes.
It's actually the emotions, the dynamics, the things that I live out of. And if you want to know more about how your body keeps the score, Basil van der Kolk has a great book. Sit down with about 1 million cups of coffee and plow through that 500-page page turner. But that idea is very common in our day, that really the pain and the dysfunction that we're holding is actually in our bodies. So as I'm telling a story and these people are mirroring back to me, reflecting back to me what they hear, what truth are they giving me that I don't have access to?
Man, that's such a good, it's a deep question. I can only speak from my experience. By the way, you are a brave man for reading Body Keeps the Score. I much rather prefer taking cliff notes from guys like you who were brave enough to go through all five.
I'll be vulnerable. I haven't read in it. I read it. I've read in it. Never read it.
Yeah.
I have it sitting right on my desk in front of me, and I consult it from time to time. But it is, the concepts are everywhere. I mean, they're in psychology, in physiology, and exercise training. It's so much about that stuff, about the embodied truths.
Yeah. Yeah, I think intuitively, so I'm going back to my first story workshop weekend, and I brought a very specific memory from when I was 9, and it involved the weekend exchange with my divorced parents. My dad was running late because he was hanging out at the bar after a long week of construction, and my mom was impatiently trying to get off to her weekend. And ultimately, I had to call my dad from the bar and ask him to come get me and me and my brother. And I was 9 at the time, and I won't go into all the details, but I would say this to your question. Intuitively, well, on the surface, I really always looked at that story and said, man, my dad was a bad man that night. I mean, what an awful experience he created for me and my brother. And, there's a lot of shame that I have felt tied to that moment. A lot of anger, a lot of blame toward my dad. But intuitively, I think all of us, including me, I know that there's something that I'm kind of carrying inside from that moment, from that half hour of him being late to him showing up and everything that transpired in between. I have been carrying a lot around in my body. And intuitively, I've said this a couple times, but I want to get to it. Intuitively, I knew something was happening in that moment that my 9-year-old body and mind could not process.
Yes.
In other words, that became such a powerful, such a traumatic moment that it went from my head as a 9-year-old and it escaped its way or disassociated its way or split its way into my body. And
I'd say shattered. It shattered its way into your body.
Yeah. It was too much for my little mind to hold. And it sat there. And I will tell you what was unlocked. And this is the value for me of being in a group of witnesses, a cloud of empathetic witnesses, is that there's probably something else happening in there that I just can never been able to put my finger on in that moment. And I've always kind of been steering my head this way toward one parent. And it wasn't until I sat in front of a group and they started showing compassion and showing attunement for what I might have felt and really just sitting with me in that pain, that all of a sudden the questions started coming. What about your mom?
Hmm.
And it was with that level of curiosity that my body could start to feel a broader truth than I had accepted for 36-ish years.
Wow.
A broader truth of what was happening in that moment, that this story isn't just about one parent who didn't show up on time because he was drinking, but there was another adult in the room.
Yes.
That carries responsibility for what happened in that moment by asking me to make that phone call.
Hmm.
I gotta be Chris. I had never pulled that out of that part of my story. I'd never slowed down to think about it. And in a way, there was a deeper level of betrayal that I've been sitting on and that had been sitting in me from that story that I could never have recognized without pulling it forward and having a group of folks compassionately show up to be curious in the moment. And so it was that truth that I had been missing, but yet my body was holding on to this entire time, that unleashed a new level of grief. Yes. That unleashed a new level of anger, unleashed a new level of betrayal, that I could now recognize, that's been inside the whole time, that I needed to let go of, that I needed to let be present. And for me, when you talk about the truth, I mean, I got to experience that firsthand. And it doesn't mean that the truth then, becomes this immediate release, but I don't want to be cliche here. The truth does set you free. And it's in those next few hours and days as I started to just sit in that despair of, oh my gosh, I was betrayed by two parents in that moment, that allowed me to just grieve for that little boy and feel sorrow and feel all of it. And, and sit in that miry muck, right? The valley of the shadow of death, and invite God into that moment. And so for me, that's how when you talk about truth and, sitting in the body and what story work can do, for me, it unleashed all of that I intuitively knew that I was carrying, but I couldn't put my finger on it.
Yeah, Rob, I just thank you for sharing that piece of your story with us. As you're talking, one of the images, and I think we learn best through images, and tell me if this resonates with you or not, is that experience was almost like a shrapnel wound, like a grenade went off right next to you in that bar. And it wasn't a physical grenade, but it was this emotional, chaotic experience, and implanted in you were all these little pieces that were never allowed to heal. They just sat and they festered. And as you're telling that story, and, yes, you're getting, congruent with what's dad's role in this, but also what's mom's role in this. And what are the things that never were allowed in you to go? You weren't free to go there because you're big brother, you're supposed to bear up. There's that, we're both from religious environments. There's that honor your parents piece that I don't go back and say ill about mom or dad. So that's covering up some of those wounds. Right. But here with these folks in this group, they allowed you to peel back the layer of scar tissue and begin to one by one pick out those little barbs, those little pieces of shrapnel. And so, but then what you also said was not only was the truth being named and it was being excised, but you were also given the freedom to go to the places emotionally that your young heart just didn't have access to.
Yeah.
Grief, anger, betrayal, and so many other places that, even as I hear in your story and I hear in a bunch of other stories, and it's so true in my story, that's what allows me to heal, is to be able to bring all those feelings into one place. Now, you had all those feelings, you had that experience in that group, and yet I love the phrase that you use, the dark cave of exploring your story. you got a little bit of light shined on in that experience. But you didn't walk out skipping and jumping and all of your emotional baggage was gone and all of your coping behaviors were gone. I mean, you weren't like magically poof healed in the moment of that one group, were you?
No, I mean, no, but it's one stone to memorialize and to build from, and I think about, you use the word splintering. I think you use the word splintering. I use the word splitting, but I would just be quite honest with you. In that moment, what my mind knew to be true and what my body knew to be true were incongruent for all of those years. But by naming the truth, by allowing the grief to happen, guess what I believe happened to me over the next few days? That experience started to come back into alignment between my mind, my brain, and my body. And it's that congruence that also gives me peace. It gives my body the time and the presence it needs to pull that back into alignment with itself. And that's where the healing comes. And now, guess what? The power and the grip of shame that half hour of my life has been holding on to, because my mind and my body haven't been aligned and incongruent with what really happened. Now, all of a sudden, that becomes a healing stone, a healing memory for which I can then build off of for other healing experiences or other moments of trauma. And then it becomes a little bit of a snowfall. Well, I get to look back and I feel like I'm walking across a kind of a riverbed that's not quite dry, but it's not so deep that I can walk across, but only if there are stones to step on. And I feel like that was the first stone for me to take a step into the river, but to cross it. And now, as I've done this work over and over again, I can look over and I can say, oh my gosh, I've got a lot of stones that I can step on in this river and still be safe and not be carried away.
I love that. The Ebenezer, you know what the Ebenezer is, right?
No, tell me.
A stone of remembrance.
Ooh, I love that.
And so you place that stone there to say, hey, I've told that story in this place, and this is what it did. And it's not so much in hearing what you're saying. It's not so much that, you're resolved. I mean, you had a grand experience in that first story, but what that began to help you see, and I'm totally, I buy this hook, line, and sinker. I began to believe through that, my first storytelling experience, I began to believe that there is a place for my pain, for my emotion, for my truths, so that they can be connected. They can be integrated back into my life. Yeah. And so that's what I'm hearing, is that you use the word, and nobody likes this word, but it's the one gift that we have on this earth, but it's also the one thing that's hardest to accept. It's time. Is that, when I walked away from doing my story work, I feel better, but I need time to let it season. I need time to walk back by that stone again and go, I remember that. Yeah. I'm connected to that.
Yeah. I know your listeners might be wondering, oh, that sounds great, but I've got about 200 of those. And I would say me too. I really would. I would say me too. And so does it mean I'll be doing story work the rest of my life? I mean, I don't know, but what I can tell you is, as I've continued to pick up each one of those moments of defining shame for me in my life, it seems as though the healing starts to take on a movement of acceleration.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, like you mentioned last time, we also gain the ability to see stories in our lives with greater clarity within ourselves and in real time. I think, that where in the past I would have no clue of how to make sense of this. I mean, I can tell you the story, my big traumas are with my dad. And there's a whole story, and as an adult, of our relationship. But as I've gotten healthier and healthier and more connected to my understanding of my story, I've been able to attune and contain in a much more profitable way as an adult. And because ultimately I'm the one that's got to walk this out, and I'm the one that needs the skills to be able to experience the life that I'm intended for. I won't do it perfectly for sure, but I think, not telling, let me say it like this, never stopping the storytelling isn't so much of like, I got a bunch of work to do, as much as it is the way I see my life. I feel like storytelling is actually what I'll be doing, frankly, forever. And I mean, not only in this life, but in the life to come. Because as I tell my story, I'm able to talk about redemption. I'm able to talk about what was bad and evil and harmful that has been made good and kind and connected.
Yeah.
And so that's the story I want. I mean, that's why we go to the movies. I mean, you've seen the same daggum story in a movie over and over and over again, just with different characters and different settings. I think there's only 6 movie plots in the whole of all of movies.
Yeah.
But we still love the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't fear the storytelling as much when I know that it's really about me experiencing the redemption, the goodness, the beauty that I long for every day of my life.
Yeah. Thank you. I just say I received that. And I think there's so much goodness and truth in that. I don't need to repeat it, but I would just say wholeheartedly, yes, that's it. That's it, brother. And I would leave your listeners with this plug. You didn't ask me to say this, but you do an excellent job of co-leading with one of your buddies, also named Chris, twice a year with the Story Workshop. We'll be joining each other at the end of July in the mountains of North Carolina with another group of 10 or 12 of us, going through the same process together, holding each other's pain, naming the truth, and experiencing the goodness that God intended in the land of the living, right? We're
always doing that work.
Not after we pass away, but the goodness He has for us now. And so thank you.
You got it. And just selfishly, I planned that in the happiest place on earth for me, near the Nantahala Gorge in Bryson City, North Carolina.
I'm looking forward.
I straight up did it because I found a house nearby that it's actually 16 guys that are going to be there. 16 guys, 14 guys, and my friend Chris and I will be there for a 3-day weekend. So
looking forward to it, brother.
It'll be great. Rob, I sure do appreciate the beauty and the integrity that you bring to sharing your story and to engaging this audience. And it's such a help to them to be able to allow them to reflect their lives off of yours. So thank you so much for the work that you continue to do and the kindness that you bring to us, man.
Awesome. Great to be with you, Chris.
Talk to you soon, guys. Take care.
Don't forget to subscribe for more episodes. You can connect with Chris at pornfreemasculinity.com.